kind of stumbled onto this issue by accident pretty recently, and I know that the issue has been around for a while, so you're going to have to forgive me for being a little bit late on this. But I got Portal 2 for my birthday, and basically played the hell out of it for 2 days straight until I beat it. It's an amazing game, and it's one of the best games that I've ever played. In fact, if you have a PS3 and want to do co-op, go ahead and add me. I'll go ahead and put my handle on the screen there, because it's just an awesome game, and I'd love to play it with pretty much anybody. Anyway, when I was done, I was so enthralled by the hilarious dialogue of the game that I went searching for all things Portal 2 on YouTube. And it was shortly after that I became aware of the controversy surrounding a few of the lines. For those of you not in the know, the character that you play is not only female, but she is also adopted. And this is something that came up once in the first Portal, and it's a concept that they ran with in this one. Basically, to sum up, there comes a point in the game when you hear this.
Apparently, being civil isn't motivating you, so let's try her way, alright? Fatty. Adopted fatty, no parents. What?
What exactly is wrong with being adopted?
What's wrong with being adopted? Lack of parents.
For the record, you are adopted, and that's terrible.
Now, this caused an apparent stir among some who felt that the line was offensive and possibly damaging to adoptive children who may be playing the game. So a news station actually reported on this and interviewed a father who actually did have an adopted daughter. That gentleman has gotten a bit of flack for his interview by YouTube users, and the whole controversy seems to be split about 60-40. The 60 believing that this is really no big deal, and the 40 believing that this part of the game was absolutely reprehensible. There are two parts to this controversy that I want to address, so let's begin with the first, which is the father that didn't want his adopted daughter hearing these particular lines. I have started to notice, thankfully, that the outrage with regard to the YouTube community about this story seem to be directed in the right place, that is, at the people reporting it. No one really seemed to have that much of a problem with what Mr. Staple was saying, and I'm happy about that because I personally found him to be both reasonable and fair. My problem was with the way this particular news broadcast spun his story and how selectively they manipulated some of his words. Here are a few excerpts from his interview.
While Neil says he and his wife Marcia have never hidden the fact Zoe is adopted,
she's Chinese. She obviously doesn't look like us.
They wanted to wait until she was ready to talk about it.
It throws the question, the most ultimate question that child is ever going to have for you. And it just throws her right in the living room. If you're not an adoptive parent, it's probably not that big a deal to you. If you are an adoptive parent, it was literally the worst thing that I could possibly have heard. I can't imagine my life without her. I mean, she's just such an awesome child. She's just made our lives so much better.
Basically, what Mr. Staple is saying here is that a sensitive topic came up in a game that directly affected his daughter. It was a joke, sure, but it would have been a precarious topic for this family in any context. Now, note how Mr. Staple didn't say anything bad about the game, or the game's makers, or the companies that distribute them. He was just concerned that his adopted daughter might hear this line. As I said, I have no problem with any of this. Staple is doing what he's supposed to be doing, protecting his daughter. And I believe that the only reason he did this interview was to let people know that the line was in the game. He didn't call for a boycott on the game, he didn't vilify the game, and in fact he let his daughter finish the game. He just had her skip over that one particular line. This whole thing was a sensitive issue for him, but it certainly wasn't a witch hunt. Unfortunately, the people reporting this story didn't seem to be aware of that.
Yeah, I bet he was shocked and really surprised by something like this.
Yeah, no idea, particularly
Horrible.
because this is a game that builds itself as educational. It's rated E for everyone. As we said, Neil Staple was playing the game with his 10-year-old adopted daughter when they saw the clip tonight. He says he and his wife are still searching for a way to try to explain it.
Now, of course, for the record, Portal 2 is not a game that pretends to be educational, and just because you have to solve puzzles in a game doesn't make the game educational. But more to the point, these people are making Staple's story out to be something that it's not. Staple was not out to get this game, or video games in general. But look at the way the reporters are spinning this. They're all shaking their heads like, oh, here we go again, video game makers trying to sell evil to our kids. That's not what anyone's problem with this is. That isn't even what Staple's problem with this was. But these guys are treating it as if the game makers already know they did something wrong and are deliberately ducking the issue to try and sell poison to our youth.
Now, again, we did say this game was educational, and it's because you have to sort of figure out a way to get out of every single room. We did contact Sony, who distributes the game. They told us to contact Valve, the company that actually created the game. I did. We have not heard back from them.
Yeah, passing the buck on to somebody else.
Certainly seems that way.
That's not passing the buck, you morons. The reason Sony said to contact Valve is because Sony isn't the game's creator or distributor. Valve is. The girl just happened to be playing the PS3 version of the game. And let's take another listen to one of these people's main concerns in this story.
Alright, fatty, adopted fatty, fatty, no parents.
Did you hear that? The character in the popular kids video game is actually taunted for being adopted.
Yep, she sure was. But if we're going to be offended and outraged about that, then why was nobody offended and outraged about this?
Hello, Belle.
Bonjour, Gaston. Gaston, may I have my book, please?
How can you read this? There's no pictures.
Well, some people use their imagination.
Belle, it's about time you got your head out of those books and paid attention to more important things. Like me. The whole town's talking about it. It's not right for a woman to read. Soon she starts getting ideas and thinking.
Shouldn't we all be saying that this scene may lead to little girls feeling that to intellectually better themselves is to do something freakish? That a woman shouldn't waste her time reading and only focus on trying to find a man to take care of her? Isn't that the impression that little girls will get when hearing this line? Of course not. And you know why? Because this is coming from Gaston. Sometimes a little context goes a long way, and what these people need to realize is that the adoption and weight references were being said to the protagonist by what at this time were two villains who will say anything to get to her. But these people wouldn't know that, because just like the Fox News cock-up regarding Mass Effect, these people have clearly never played the game. They only heard about this and ran with it as a "won't someone please think of the children" segment. Once again, I personally have absolutely no problem with anything that Mr. Staples said or felt in this interview. And I think a lot of people would probably have felt the same if this news station had actually bothered airing all of the pertinent things he said in that interview in the first place. Here are the parts of that interview that you didn't hear the first time around.
It's a fantastic game. It's a great game. It's just that one little blurb in there.
Staple was playing the game with his 10-year-old adopted daughter. He says while he was offended by it, he realizes not everyone will be.
So Staples said very specifically in his interview that the game was great. And again, he even let his kids play the rest of it. He just didn't want them playing that particular part. And all of this would have been good to know in the first segment they aired, but you didn't hear this in the first broadcast. All of these clips came from a segment they had to do later in a clarification after people wrote in explaining that Sony didn't make or distribute the game, and that E10 doesn't mean for everyone, and that the game isn't meant to be educational. In other words, all the things that they as reporters should have found out before they did this story in the first place. I find nothing more annoying than the mindset of, if the facts don't match what's in my mind, they must not be facts. These people went in believing that video games are inherently bad for our kids, and just spun this story to suit that belief, without knowing anything about the actual game. But what really gets to me is how they used a man's reasonable concerns to suit unreasonable ends. Anyway, that's how I feel about the issue. Let me know what you all think about this, and thank you for watching.